Jamie Metzl was a National Security Council official in the Clinton administration, and he is a current serving member of a WHO Committee on Genetic Engineering. He has signed an open letter calling for a new inquiry into the origins of COVID, and he joined me a little earlier.
One of the things that we need to make clear is that the entity that did this investigation was not the World Health Organization. It was a joint study of an independent advisory committee, albeit to the World Health Organization and their Chinese government counterparts. On top of that, 4 members of the international team had prior working relationships with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and one of them, Peter Daszak, had actually been a funder of gain-of-function research at that institute. That is a clear conflict of interest that should have precluded him from participation in this process. So this was not an investigation. It was not capable of examining all of the possible hypotheses, and I don't think that we should see this report as authoritative in any way.
The WHO report says the most likely origin was a transfer to humans through bats with an intermediary host, and the second most likely was that bats directly transmitted COVID-19 to humans. What do you think about these 2 scenarios and whether or not they are actually very likely?
We don't know which hypotheses are more likely than others. Clearly, we have to accept that a zoonotic jump from animals to humans is possible because many pandemics, like the Hendra in the past, have happened that way. The frozen food transmission hypothesis, there's almost no evidence for that, but it could be conceptually possible. But the core point is that any examination of the origins of the pandemic needs to thoroughly examine all of the possible origin hypotheses. And it cannot be credible to say we're only going to look at zoonotic jump and cold chain, and we won't even lift a finger to examine the lab leak hypothesis. And then it's just outrageous to try to rank which possibility is more likely than others when some of them have been examined and others, like lab leak hypothesis, simply have not. Zoonotic is one possibility, and lab leak is an equally or maybe even more likely possibility. So I'm not saying that I don't think that zoonotic jump is unlikely. I personally think it's less likely, but I think that the whole process now should be to examine all of the hypotheses thoroughly. And that's why this entire joint team study, in my view, is not credible or valid because they examined some hypotheses and not others, and then had the temerity to rank the likelihood of the different hypotheses.
The WHO report says it's unlikely that the virus leaked from a laboratory, when in fact there is a large body of circumstantial evidence that supports the laboratory, as the most likely origin for the coronavirus. Take me through some of the most compelling pieces of circumstantial evidence.
We know that the backbone virus in SARS-CoV-2 is a horseshoe bat coronavirus. Those horseshoe bats live in southern China. Wuhan is well beyond their range. Wuhan doesn't have horseshoe bats. This pandemic began in the middle of winter. But what Wuhan does have is China's only level 4 virology institute with the world's largest collection of bat coronaviruses that was doing aggressive gain-of-function research, including to make those highly pathogenic viruses more transmissible to human cells. We know that when the outbreak began, the SARS-CoV-2 virus was almost perfectly adapted for transmission to humans. I can't say for sure that SARS-CoV-2 began with an accidental lab leak, but the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. On top of that, from day one, China began a massive cover-up that involved destroying samples, hiding databases and other records, imprisoning journalists, and placing a universal gag order preventing any Chinese scientist from speaking or writing about the origins of the pandemic. This raises very serious questions that at least must be thoroughly investigated.
Fauci last week assured the public that the lab leak was unlikely, and he was speaking in response to Robert Redfield's remarks. How concerned are you about Fauci's role in funding the Wuhan Institute of Virology and his own conflicts in this space?
There is no doubt that the National Institutes of Health and the Defense Department and USAID funded some of the work that was being carried out at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and that needs to be thoroughly investigated. I'm not deeply concerned about Dr. Fauci's conflict because Dr. Fauci is not involved in the investigation. The reason why there's such a problem with Peter Daszak and the EcoHealth Alliance isn't that it was involved with funding gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. It's that Peter Daszak is part of the international team that has been tasked with looking into the origins of the pandemic. That's where the conflict is.
Jamie, we know from the declassified intelligence the US released earlier this year that China has a bioweapons program and that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was under military control. I interviewed David Asher a couple of weeks ago on Sky News, and he said that one possibility for the origin of COVID-19 is that it might have been a vaccine or an antidote to a bioweapons program. What do you think about this idea?
I'm not aware of any bioweapons research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, but we know that scientists at the WIV were trying to develop vaccines to coronaviruses. And we know that part of that process was pushing these viruses to make them more pathogenic. And so it's extremely possible, in my view, that some aspect of this outbreak could be connected to that work.
What I think is so frustrating is that people who don't know the ins and outs of all of this, they see news of the WHO report and they think the most likely origin is animals to humans. China's propaganda manifested in this WHO report is even now, a year on, still shaping world opinion. How unacceptable is it that we haven't had an actual scientific investigation into the origins of this outbreak?
We need to be 100% clear that this joint study report is not a World Health Organization report. It does not even reflect the views of the World Health Organization. The views of the World Health Organization were best expressed by its Director General, Dr. Tedros Adhanom, who said very clearly that he believes that all origin hypotheses need to be fully investigated, and that means including the possibility of an accidental lab leak. So we should be supporting the World Health Organization. We should be supporting the incredible courage of Dr. Tedros to make this claim, because it is outrageous that more than 1 year after the pandemic began, with nearly 3 million people dead, we still have no credible international investigations into the origin of this terrible crisis.